This is a story about a slap. But it's not just any slap. It's the kind of slap that echoes not with sound, but with the shattering of a life built on arrogance and blind prejudice. Our story begins in the pristine, unerringly organized aisles of Quantum Solutions, a sprawling electronics store that feels more like a sterile laboratory than a place to buy a laptop. At its helm is the store manager, a man named Markinson, a man who in his own mind was a titan of retail. He was a man of rules, of order, and of absolute, unquestionable authority. He believed that the store's success, its perfect-looking shelves, and its intimidated, quiet staff was a direct result of his iron-fisted leadership. He carried himself with the puffed-up confidence of a king ruling a small, plastic kingdom. He saw a person's worth not in their character, but in the clothes they wore and the assumed size of their wallet. He had a particular disdain for what he called loiterers, anyone who looked like they didn't belong, anyone who wasn't dressed to impress. He was quick to judge and even quicker to dismiss. One Tuesday afternoon, the air in the store was thick with the manufactured calm of corporate efficiency. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the polite yet firm voices of sales associates echoed through the silent aisles. That's when Julian walked in. He didn't look like he belonged. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit or a designer watch. In fact, he looked like he'd been on his feet for hours. He was dressed in a simple, well-worn polo shirt, a pair of dark jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. His hands were in his pockets, and his gaze was thoughtful, observant. He moved with a quiet purpose, his eyes scanning not the products but the people, the employees. He watched a young cashier, a nervous kid named Liam, fumble with a customer's purchase. Liam's hand was shaking slightly, and a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Julian saw this not as incompetence, but as a sign of stress of a pressure cooker environment. Julian approached Liam quietly, smiling gently. "Hey, man," he said in a low, reassuring voice. "Everything okay? Take a breath. It's just a customer." Liam looked up, startled, a flash of fear in his eyes. He quickly glanced over Julian's shoulder, and his face went white. He knew what was coming. Markinson had been watching from his glass-walled office. He'd seen the disheveled man talking to his employee. This was exactly the kind of disruption he couldn't stand. He strode out of his office, his polished shoes clicking on the tile floor with a sound that demanded attention. He walked directly toward Julian, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Can I help you, sir?" Markinson's voice was slick with false politeness, a veneer of customer service over a core of pure contempt. Julian turned slowly, his calm demeanor unruffled. "I was just checking in on this young man." He seemed a little overwhelmed. Markinson let out a short, humorless laugh. "Liam knows his job. What he doesn't need is interference from a distraction." His eyes raked over Julian, a clear message of dismissal in his gaze. "This is a place of business. We don't tolerate loitering or distracting our staff." Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed just a fraction. "I'm not loitering. I'm observing. There's a difference." "I don't care what you call it," Markinson sneered, puffing out his chest. He was used to people backing down. They always did. His authority was a shield, and no one dared to challenge it. "You're clearly not here to shop. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Julian shook his head slightly, a profound sense of disappointment washing over his face. "I think you're missing the point. My employees shouldn't be afraid to do their jobs. They should feel supported." Markinson's composure finally broke. The word employees triggered something. Who was this man, this nobody in a polo shirt, to call his staff my employees? The rage, fueled by a lifetime of small-minded power, bubbled to the surface. He saw an easy target, a man who wouldn't fight back, a man he could humiliate and dismiss to reassert his dominance. The words were a red flag, an audacious challenge to his kingdom. Markinson's hand shot out without a second thought, his palm connecting with Julian's cheek, with sharp, sickening smack. The sound was a bomb going off in the quiet store. It wasn't just a physical shock. It was an explosion of disbelief. Customers froze. Employees recoiled. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Markinson stood there, his hands still tingling, a smirk of triumph on his face. "Get out," he spat, "or I'm calling the police. I will have you arrested for assault." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even rub his cheek. He just looked at Markinson, a deep, unsettling sadness in his eyes. It was a look that said, "You have no idea what you've just done." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't call 911. He dialed a number from his contacts, a number with a single name, Elias. He held the phone to his ear, his gaze never leaving Markinson's. "Elias," he said, his voice low and calm, "I need you to open up a secure line. Tell the head of corporate security to meet me at the Quantum Solutions store on 5th Street. Immediately." There was a pause. Julian continued, his voice gaining a hard, commanding edge. "Tell him to bring the company ID and the audit files for this specific location. And tell him I want everyone's access to this store revoked in the next 5 minutes, starting with the manager, effective immediately. I'll explain everything when you get here." Markinson's smirk faltered. He scoffed, a nervous, disbelieving sound. "Who do you think you are? You think a phone call is going to fix this?" Suddenly, the store's intercom system crackled to life. It wasn't a generic music track. A disembodied, synthesized voice echoed through the speakers, a voice that carried the weight of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. "Attention, all employees," the voice announced. "All network access for the store location has been temporarily disabled by order of corporate management. Please refrain from using any point-of-sale systems until further notice. This is a Level 1 security event." Markinson's face went pale. His tablet, which controlled the store systems, flickered and then went dark. A dozen employees looked down at their own tablets and saw the same thing. The store was in a state of digital lockdown. Before Markinson could even stammer a question, a sleek, black town car pulled up to the front of the store, tires hissing on the asphalt. 2 men in sharp, custom suits got out, followed by a woman with a tablet tucked under her arm. They moved with a speed and purpose that made Markinson's heart pound. They weren't police. They weren't simple security guards. They were something else. They were power. They walked straight past the frozen employees and the slack-jawed customers, their eyes fixed on Julian. Elias, the man in front, a figure of silent, authoritative strength, held out a small, black leather card holder. Julian took it, his gaze still fixed on Markinson. Julian opened the case and withdrew a single, simple card. It was a corporate ID card, but not just any card. It was an access key, a digital key, and a physical key to the entire organization. The woman with the tablet, Julian's executive assistant, spoke into a small headset. "Confirmed," she said. "All systems for this location are fully under control of Mr. Hayes. Managers, personal and system access has been terminated." The sound of Markinson's world collapsing was silent, but he could feel in the cold sweat that was now running down his spine. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Julian finally spoke, his voice no longer just calm, but filled with the unyielding authority of someone who held the fate of 1,000 people in his hands. He held up the card so Markinson could see the name printed on it, the name Markinson had seen on every corporate memo, on every quarterly report, on every piece of official communication. "My name," Julian said, his voice quiet but absolutely final, "is Julian Hayes. I am the founder, the CEO, and the majority shareholder of Quantum Solutions. And you," he said, taking a step closer, "you just slapped me." The color drained from Markinson's face entirely. He opened his mouth to stammer an apology, to beg, to plead, but no sound came out. The arrogance, the power, the false bravado, it all vanished in an instant, replaced by a hollow shell of a man who realized he had just struck God. Julian didn't gloat. There was no theatrical display of power. He simply looked at the man he was speaking to, not as an equal, but as an unfortunate, a footnote. "I came here today because I wanted to see what my company looked like at its roots. I wanted to see the people who make it all work. And what I found," he said, gesturing around the store, "was an environment of fear. I saw a young man shaking while he worked, and a manager who judged a person by their clothes and who was more than willing to use physical violence to enforce his petty will. That," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "is a cancer in my company, and I will not tolerate it." Julian turned to his team. Elias, I want this man escorted from the premises. He is no longer an employee of this company. His personal information is to be flagged across the entire retail industry. He will never manage a store again, and I want the police informed of his assault on me and given my statement. He turned back to Markinson, a single, final command in his eyes. Get out of my store. Markinson stood there, a broken man, as two of Julian's men gently but firmly took his arms and led him away. His small kingdom had been dissolved in a single, devastating moment of poetic justice. Julian then turned to the assembled employees, his posture relaxing slightly. He addressed the young cashier, Liam, who was still standing frozen behind his register. Liam, Julian said, his voice now warm and reassuring. Thank you for what you do. No one should ever feel afraid at work. Starting now, this store is under new management. I'm going to find someone who leads with respect and kindness, not with fear. You all deserve to work for someone who sees your worth. I'm going to make sure that from this day forward, this store and every other Quantum Solutions store operates on the principles of dignity, respect, and opportunity. I want you all to tell me what you need, what's been wrong, and what we can do to make it right. Starting today, we're building something better, something real. And with that, Julian Hayes, the billionaire CEO, stayed there for hours, talking to every single employee, listening to their stories, and beginning the long and difficult process of healing the damage caused by a small man with a big ego. The story of the slap will become a legend in the company, a reminder that the true test of power isn't in what you can take from people, but in what you can give them. It was a slap that didn't just hurt a man's face. It brought an entire empire to its knees and then slowly built it back up on a foundation of